Hi, my name is Evelyn Carter, and I never thought I would share a story like this. I've always lived quietly, loving books, mornings with coffee, and the simple rhythm of my little life in Maple Ridge. But something happened that changed everything in ways I never could have imagined. It started the morning after my son passed. I stood on the porch, the rain soaking my coat, and realized that the home we built together, the life we shared, was suddenly no longer mine. My daughter-in-law walked through that same front door, her steps sharp, her presence claiming what I had thought untouchable. I felt the weight of silence, the kind that presses down on your chest, and I knew then that my world had shifted. I had trusted Andrew every late night, every dollar, every hope I poured into his future. And now, with him gone, it felt like everything he had built, everything we had shared, was slipping through my fingers. But there was a whisper in the back of my mind, something he had told me months before. He had always believed in systems, in planning, in leaving pieces behind that could endure beyond him. I didn't understand fully at the time, but as I stood there in the drizzle, I began to suspect that this system might be more than just his work. It might be a lifeline, a final gift of trust. Have you ever felt that everything familiar could vanish in a single moment? That is how I felt, but somehow, beneath the grief, a small flame of curiosity began to glow. What had Andrew left for me, and could it possibly undo the injustice I was staring at? I didn't know the answers yet, but I knew I had to find out. I took a deep breath, letting the rain soak me fully, and stepped into the first chapter of a journey I could never have planned. A journey of loss, betrayal, and the quiet strength that comes from trusting in someone you loved beyond reason. Before all of this, my life had a quiet rhythm I cherished. I had spent decades as a school librarian in Maple Ridge, surrounded by books and the soft hum of students discovering new worlds. It was simple, steady, and fulfilling in its own way. I never considered myself remarkable. I simply showed up every day, helping children find their voices and keeping order in the gentle chaos of the library. Then Andrew came along. From the moment he was a boy, he was relentless in his curiosity. While other kids were outside playing, he was in our basement, surrounded by wires, circuit boards, and computers that seemed far too complicated for a 12-year-old. I didn't always understand what he was building, but I understood him. I understood his dreams, his restless energy, and his insistence that anything could be solved with patience and imagination. I remember late nights sitting beside him, labeling boxes of cables like they were precious books. We brewed coffee to keep ourselves awake, and I watched him pace in our kitchen, rehearsing plans for his small startup, which started with nothing but determination and 2 refurbished servers. My heart swelled with pride every time he showed me a new idea, a new system he had created, always saying that trust and careful planning were everything. I trusted him completely, and he trusted me in return. By the time he was in his 20s, Andrew had built something remarkable from scratch, but he never lost that spark, that endless curiosity. And in helping him, I realized something vital. Supporting someone's dreams isn't just about money or time. It's about being fully present, offering encouragement even when you don't fully understand the path. Looking back now, I see that those years with Andrew were more than memories. They were lessons, not just in love or patience, but in foresight. He had a mind for strategy, a quiet brilliance that few saw. And it was that brilliance, his way of leaving things in place long before the storm arrived, that would one day become my lifeline. I often wonder, did I see the signs early enough? Did I understand the depth of his planning as I left the library each day? I carried a sense of calm and purpose, unaware that the same meticulous care Andrew put into his work would soon extend to a plan meant to protect me from the very grief and betrayal I would face. And yet, even in those warm, steady years, a shadow of uncertainty had begun to form, one I would not fully recognize until that fateful morning after his funeral. The funeral was a blur, a sequence of faces and flowers and the soft murmur of condolences that barely registered. I kept thinking about Andrew, the vibrant, restless young man who had filled every corner of my life with light. And then, just like that, he was gone. My chest ached with a kind of emptiness I had never known. I had buried parents. I had buried a husband. But losing a child, losing Andrew felt like the air had been pulled from the world itself. It wasn't just grief that hit me. It was the realization that with him gone, the world we had built together, our home, our routines, our memories could be claimed by someone who didn't understand or care about what it meant. My daughter-in-law, Bianca, moved through the house in a way that made it clear she believed everything belonged to her now. She didn't glance at me, didn't hesitate, her confidence absolute. I remember standing there, silently observing and feeling more like a ghost than a mother. The spaces that had once been ours were now hers to rearrange, to sell, to claim as trophies. The lawyer reading Andrew's will only confirmed what I already feared. Bianca inherited everything, controlling shares in his company, investments, property, even the house. My name appeared once, a single line of gratitude that felt colder than any insult. I could see the small, triumphant smile on Bianca's lips and understand, in a quiet, sinking way, that she believed she had won. 2 days later, she arrived with movers, instructing them to clear out my son's library, the very heart of his creativity, declaring the books and furniture junk. I packed my few belongings into a suitcase and stepped out into the rain. The lock clicked behind me, a sound that felt like finality, erasing me from the life I had shared with Andrew. And yet, even in the midst of that humiliation, I held a quiet thought in my mind, one Andrew had planted months before: trust the system he built. At the time, I had assumed he meant his company, his career. Now, sitting in a small motel room, listening to the hum of the ice machine outside, I began to suspect he had meant something much larger, something that could withstand greed, cruelty, and impatience. As I lay awake that night, the silence of the room pressing against me, I realized that my grief was not the end. It was the opening, the beginning of a journey I hadn't yet understood. Bianca's confidence, her apparent triumph, was just the surface. Beneath it lay the careful, quiet design of Andrew's foresight. The question that lingered in my mind, one I knew I would have to answer, was simple but impossible. Had I missed something? Or had Andrew left me a way to reclaim what truly mattered? The storm of betrayal had arrived, and I was at its center. But even in that cold, dark moment, there was a flicker of curiosity, a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, Andrew had already laid the groundwork for a justice that would not be visible to those blinded by greed. Sitting in that small, dimly lit motel room, I let the rain soak through my coat as I tried to make sense of everything: the house, the money, the life Andrew and I had built together. It all seemed gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Andrew had left more than grief behind. He had always been methodical, a planner, someone who anticipated the unexpected. I remembered his words from a quiet night in the library. Just a month before he became ill, he had asked me to trust the system he built, to trust him completely. At the time, I thought he meant his business, his financial plans, the future he was creating. Now, in the hollow quiet of the motel, I began to suspect he meant something far more profound. I thought back to every late night, every conversation about investments, every instruction he had left in his meticulous handwriting. He had a way of making complexity feel simple, of embedding safety nets in plain sight. Perhaps, I realized, the will I had read, the one that seemed so cold and final, was only the surface of a much deeper plan. I traced my fingers along the back of the motel receipt, jotting down the phone number for Martin Whitaker, Andrew's longtime attorney. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the mix of grief and a glimmer of hope. Could it be possible that Andrew had prepared for Bianca's ambition, for her greed, and had left me a way to protect the legacy we had shared? The thought was almost too fragile to hold, but I clung to it. For the first time since the funeral, I felt a flicker of agency. My grief was still raw, my heart still heavy, but I began to see the outline of a path forward. I imagined Andrew, hunched over his desk, designing systems and contingencies that I had only glimpsed in moments of pride and casual curiosity. He had anticipated the worst. He had trusted me to finish what he had started. I took a deep breath, trying to quiet the chaos in my mind. What would I do if I discovered that he had truly left a hidden safeguard? A plan to restore balance and justice without me needing to fight directly. Could I be patient enough to let it unfold, to let him guide me from beyond the grave? And in that quiet reflection, a sense of calm began to settle over me. The storm of betrayal outside the motel walls was still raging, but inside, I felt the first stirrings of a plan. I would reach out to Martin. I would listen. I would trust Andrew's system. Have you ever been in a moment where everything you knew seemed gone, but a tiny thread of hope reminded you that someone you loved had already thought of a way through it? That thread, fragile as it was, became my anchor. And as I closed my eyes that night, I realized that the next steps would not be loud or dramatic. They would be quiet, deliberate, and guided by the wisdom of someone who had always planned ahead. The morning light through the motel window promised the start of a journey I could not yet fully see. But I was ready to take the first step into Andrew's plan, trusting the system he had built and the faith he had placed in me. The next evening, I finally called Martin Whitaker, Andrew's attorney, my fingers trembling as I pressed the phone. I reminded myself that this call wasn't about confrontation. It was about trust. The same trust Andrew had asked me to place in his plan. Martin's voice carried both relief and caution, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. And in that careful tone, he began to explain what I had suspected all along. Andrew's will was only the first layer. Beneath it lay contingencies, measures designed to protect both me and the legacy he had worked so hard to build. Martin explained fiduciary duty, procedural holds, and legal safeguards in a way that made it all feel clear without being overwhelming. Bianca, he said, had been given full control for a period of 30 days, but with obligations she had no intention of honoring. By removing me from the house and discarding my presence, she had unwittingly triggered the very mechanisms Andrew had put in place. The realization washed over me slowly, like sunlight through fog. Everything I had feared, the loss, the humiliation. It was part of a design, a test that Bianca had failed spectacularly. In the days that followed, I stayed quiet in my motel, letting the system work. I watched from the shadows as Bianca moved through the city like someone who believed the world was hers. She purchased luxury cars, visited boutiques, and redecorated the house with an air of absolute confidence. And yet, with every bold move, she unknowingly walked into Andrew's carefully laid barriers. Her credit cards declined unexpectedly. Deposits vanished. Contractors were halted by procedural injunctions. Every step she took only tightened the system around her, a silent, invisible cage. I remember feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and disbelief as I observed the chaos from afar. The storm outside had not touched me. I was safe within the plan Andrew had entrusted to me. And yet, the moral of it all was clear. This was not revenge born of anger. It was justice, patient and deliberate, orchestrated by someone who had known me, loved me, and trusted that I would see it through. Martin's updates were calm, methodical, each one a small confirmation that the plan was unfolding exactly as Andrew intended. I began to understand that Andrew's brilliance wasn't just in his business acumen, it was in knowing human nature, in predicting greed and recklessness, and in building a system that rewarded patience and integrity. Every setback Bianca faced, every obstacle she encountered, was a testament to Andrew's foresight and to the quiet strength he believed I possessed. And in the quiet moments, I reflected on my own part in all of this. I had always trusted Andrew, had always believed in the value of careful planning and patience. Now, that same patience became my tool, my weapon against injustice, without ever needing to lift a hand. It was humbling to realize that the real power lay not in confrontation or anger, but in quiet observation, in letting the truth unfold in its own time. By the fifth day, the cracks in Bianca's empire were undeniable. The house, the cars, the finances, each barrier Andrew had built was asserting itself, and she had no idea why. I realized then that the system was more than numbers or legal documents. It was a reflection of the values Andrew had lived by: intelligence, foresight, and integrity. And as I prepared for what I knew would be the next chapter, the moment when the plan reached its climax, I felt a cautious hope for the first time since the funeral. The storm had passed, and for the first time, I sensed that the tide was turning. Bianca's confidence would crumble, not with fury or confrontation, but with the quiet, inevitable unfolding of a system that had been built with love and trust. The day I stepped into Martin Whitaker's office felt strangely calm, even though I knew everything was about to change. I wore the navy suit Andrew had chosen for me years ago, the one he said made me look confident without trying too hard. Sitting in the waiting room, I held a book in my lap, though I barely read a word. My heart was steady, though a quiet anticipation hummed beneath the surface. When Bianca entered, her carefully polished appearance seemed slightly frayed, her confidence faltering just enough for me to notice. I felt no anger, no need for confrontation. I simply observed, the calm I had cultivated in the motel weeks ago still holding me steady. This was Andrew's moment, the system he had built finally reaching its peak. Martin laid out the truth in a quiet, deliberate way. Bianca had failed the fiduciary duty Andrew had entrusted to her. Expelling me from the home, dismissing my presence and the family's legacy, had triggered the safeguards. The sealed documents were now being opened, and everything Andrew had worked for, everything he had protected, was to be entrusted to me. The room was still, filled with the weight of the moment. I reflected on how patience had brought me here. I had felt powerless for days, sitting in that motel, watching Bianca move through the world with reckless confidence. Yet her every action had played directly into Andrew's plan. The fortune she flaunted was now under strict oversight, and the house, the company, and the investments were secured for the purposes Andrew had always cared about: legacy, education, and opportunity. Bianca's face went pale as Martin detailed the consequences of her choices. I realized then that the justice was not violent, not vengeful, it was inevitable. The brilliance of Andrew's foresight and my quiet trust in his system had created a moment where truth and consequence aligned perfectly. She had acted out of greed, but the world had its own way of correcting course, silently and decisively. I felt a wave of relief, the first real sense of peace since Andrew passed. Everything we had built together, everything he had dreamed of, was protected. The weight of grief was still there. Yes, but it was mingled now with purpose, with the knowledge that the legacy of love and wisdom Andrew left behind would continue to grow. In that office, as I absorbed the reality of the moment, I thought about how easy it can be to let anger guide decisions, how tempting it is to respond to cruelty with fury. But this experience had taught me something profound: patience, careful observation, and trust in those we love can be far more powerful than any outburst. I felt Andrew's presence in that quiet order, in the way the system he built honored values over wealth, integrity over impulse. And as I left the office, I realized that the storm was truly over. Bianca would have to live within the constraints of her own actions, while I could finally begin to move forward, guided by the trust Andrew had placed in me and the legacy he had protected with such care. After everything settled, the motel room and its quiet isolation became nothing more than a memory. I returned to the house, not as someone displaced, but as a steward of the legacy Andrew had carefully protected. The library, which Bianca once dismissed as junk, became the heart of a new beginning. Its shelves, lined with books Andrew had loved, now shared space with whiteboards, laptops, and eager young minds learning to dream and create. I realized then that his vision had never been about money. It had been about opportunity, about ensuring that knowledge and curiosity could flourish beyond his own life. Opening the Andrew Carter Tech Scholars Foundation in that familiar space was a moment of quiet triumph. The students who filled the room were not just learners. They were living proof that Andrew's belief in curiosity, diligence, and integrity could touch lives in ways I had only imagined. Every day, I walked past their focused faces, adjusting a stack of papers or straightening a book, feeling the warmth of purpose that comes from nurturing something meaningful. I thought often about Bianca. Her life had not crumbled in ruin, but it had returned to ordinary rhythms, defined not by wealth or power, but by responsibility and limitation. Watching her navigate that reality reminded me that consequences do not always need fury to be felt. The system Andrew designed had been enough. Through all of this, I discovered a lesson that felt as vital as the air I breathed. Patience is not weakness, and quiet trust can be more powerful than anger. The world often rewards those who act impulsively, but enduring change comes from thought, planning, and the courage to remain steady when others are reckless. Andrew's foresight had given me that courage, and I vowed to honor it every day. And in those moments, I found a deeper peace than I had known in years. The grief that had once consumed me softened into memory, shaped now by gratitude and purpose. Andrew's legacy was living, breathing, and expanding through every life it touched. And I, his mother, had the privilege and responsibility of ensuring it continued. The story, I realized, was never about revenge. It was about trust, foresight, and love, the things no one could ever take from us. And in that truth, I finally understood the quiet strength that had been my son's gift all along. As I look back on everything that happened, I realize the story isn't about wealth or power. It's about trust, patience, and the quiet strength that comes from love and foresight. Losing Andrew was the most devastating moment of my life. Yet through his planning, he gave me a way to navigate betrayal without losing myself. I learned that true legacy is not measured in dollars or possessions. It's measured in the values we leave behind, in the lives we touch, and in the knowledge we share with those who follow. I think about the students in the foundation, the laughter and curiosity filling the library, and I feel Andrew's presence in every moment. His system wasn't just about protecting assets, it was about protecting what mattered most: integrity, learning, and opportunity. Watching Bianca adjust to her new reality reminded me that consequences often come quietly, without the need for anger or confrontation. Justice can be subtle, deliberate, and lasting. If this story has touched you, I hope it inspires you to consider the ways patience and thoughtful action can change outcomes in your own life. Think about the people you trust and the legacy you want to leave behind. Even in moments of grief or betrayal, quiet strength and faith in those we love can carry us farther than we ever imagined. If you found value in this story, I'd love for you to like this video, share it with someone who might need encouragement, and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Every voice reminds me that no story is ever truly finished.